Johnny, the US is sending cluster bombs to the Ukrainian government to fight off the Russians. Yeah, Johnny, they're sending cluster bombs to the Ukraine. Now, the funny thing about it all is, Johnny, that 12 months ago, the Americans came out and said that the Russians were using cluster bombs and that's a violation of the bloody international law and all that fucking bullshit. And here we are, bloody 12, 18 months later. The Americans come out and say, to win this war, we've got to bloody send them bloody cluster bombs. You don't want bloody the Ukraine overrun by those nasty Russians, do you? Yeah, but Johnny, aren't they illegal?
Well, meanwhile, the US President Joe Biden has been criticized by the UN Secretary General rights groups and some fellow Democrats for his decision to supply cluster bombs to Ukraine. They are banned by more than 120 countries, but not the US.
Jesus Christ, are they?
And there is an element of hypocrisy here, isn't there? I mean, the US has in the past criticized Russia, for example, for using cluster bombs in Syria. Now it's giving them to Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, very early on in this conflict, the White House press secretary was asked about the use of Russia using cluster bombs. And what the response was if that were true, it would be considered a war crime. We also...
What?
Somehow we must not fall into the amnesia. Somehow we must remember that a year ago the White House said, oh, cluster bombs, Russia are using them, that makes them criminals. And this year they're sending cluster bombs to that war that they're not involved in other than helping people because they love humanitarianism so very much. So how can that make sense?
Yeah. Controversial weapon of this war so far.
It was a very difficult decision on my part.
Oh, thank God. Everyone go back to sleep. It's okay. I know cluster bombs are bad and that civilians might be harmed, but when they're being blown up, I just want you to bear in mind that it was a difficult decision.
It was a very difficult decision by Joe Biden, by Jesus, but he's not the one getting his fucking legs blown off.
They caused to civilians. So the fact that now this administration, of which they both work for, has decided to use them as part of a package given to Ukraine, this latest weapons package to the tune of $800 million, is really being sharply criticized around the world as being absolute hypocrisy.
I'm as concerned about the humanitarian circumstance as anybody. But the worst thing for civilians in Ukraine is for Russia to win the war.
Yeah, it just seems another example, Johnny, that the US is the biggest perpetrator of bloody terrorism and fucking wars that the world has ever seen. Holy shit, Johnny, are you serious? Yeah, they'll just say and do anything to get their own way.
The United States was one of the last countries in the world. Not only did we still use cluster bombs, we manufactured them in the United States. There were good Christians who went to a cluster bomb factory and made cluster bombs and then went to church.
I mean, shouldn't they be sending a few peace envoys over there? Shouldn't top-line people be going to bloody Russia and saying, what the hell can we do to work this out? Instead, they're going to blow the shit out of them.
Every line employed by the White House to justify sending these weapons of terror to Ukraine could be used to justify the deployment or even use of tactical nuclear weapons in the conflict. That's a brilliant point, isn't it? They're going to turn up on your TV one day going, listen, you know you've always thought nuclear bombs was a bad thing, but some nuclear bombs, American ones that you paid for, are good though because of how they would be not as bad.
And by Jesus, if they come up with enough bullshit to tell the American people, they'll use them.
Here is the story of a man, hard and relentless,